Hi all, this is Cressida here. I'm the General Manager of AIMA, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar, which we're really privileged to have Dr. Robin Kelly here talking about 5G and radio waves, particularly in the era of Covid-19. We're also really privileged to have Dr. Sandeep Gupta here to work on and answer people's questions on the chat. So just a little bit of housekeeping. As you probably know, if you've joined one of our webinars before, there's a chat section that you can talk with us on. There's also a question and answer section. If you'd like Robin to answer some of your questions, please just put your questions there and they'll be answered in the end. Also, to let you know that next week we've got Patria King talking with us. That will be happening half an hour earlier than this one. We're really grateful that she'll be joining us because she has such great wisdom to offer us on how we can cope with the grief and isolation and emotions that we're dealing with at the moment. So I'd like to welcome you all to this. I'd like to welcome Dr. Robin Kelly, and I will be transferring the host to Robin so he can bring his, he can start his presentation. So welcome all. Robin, I am making you the host now.
I am very honoured to be the host, and thank you, Cressida, for this amazing opportunity. This is the first time I've used this forum, and it's slightly different from talking to an audience, but I hope you enjoy this. I'm certainly going to give you what I feel, what I've learnt over the last 3 years. It would be wrong to call me an expert, but I have studied this, and I'm coming to it very much as a family doctor with an interest in integrative medicine, and as somebody who has studied biophysics to a certain extent, having written some books about that in the past. But I do stress it is my own view, which I've correlated and examined over the last 3 years, and I really encourage you guys to do your own work. And as we go along, I'll be giving you some references and really encouraging you to do your own research on this. So a little bit about me, because if you don't know me, it's no good at all because you won't know where I'm coming from. I've been a North Shore family doctor here in Auckland since 1981. I'm London trained. In the 70s, I did some adult radiation oncology and came over here to New Zealand and studied some childhood cancer. I became, along the way, a director of North Shore Hospice here in Auckland, and I've been involved in student health over the last few years. And this is important. I'm a past president of the Medical Acupuncture Society. Very early on in my general practice life, I started to study acupuncture, which led to my understanding of basically the sensitivity of human beings and to a certain extent biophysics, because I've tried to put some scientific bent on that. Along the way, I've written some books really to try and see how we could correlate Western and Eastern medicine, to see that they're happy bedfellows rather than in conflict with each other. And along the way, in the last few years, I've been particularly interested in complex post-traumatic stress, and I'll talk about how that, I think, relates to what I'm going to be talking about today. And so we're going to go through really what 5G is, how that relates to the whole, our future. And what the protagonists are talking about. I'll be talking about those towers that seem to be appearing in our neighborhoods and the world that's been planned for us and where 5G fits into that. Then I'm going to go to the precautionary principle, which is something that is very dear to my heart, and I believe dear to the hearts of so many complementary practitioners, doctors and natural practitioners. I'll talk a little bit about the spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum, and the science behind this. Then I make no excuse for talking about some of the politics, because it's really important to see why there's such conflict out there. I'll talk about what I perceive as the myths that are being spread out there. I'll give you a little bit more science. I'll talk a little bit, if I've got time, about electro-hypersensitivity and some solutions. And somebody has asked me to put in some complementary medical solutions. And I think many people who'll be watching this will be more experienced than me, and particularly who are members of ACNEM. And so I'll invite them to contribute and to this discussion later on. So what is 5G? Well, what's being promoted in the media very strongly is that it's going to be something amazing, that it's about doing things that we couldn't do before or even imagine before. And certainly who's prominent in the media, and those are those in telecommunications and what we call big tech. And they're very much integrated with our media because both are codependent. They're really, the media and big tech, I see, are as one. What are they talking about? Well, they're talking about the future, which is really the internet of all things, everything being interconnected. And it's almost that this interconnection is occurring in this electromagnetic soup called 5G, which are higher frequencies. So we're talking about what's happening in our households, a connected house. There's a term here, as you can see, called domotics, which is basically probably domestic robotics. So everything being connected and us having supposedly a more leisurely life. We're talking about cars that park themselves and drive themselves, entertainment beyond imagination. In other words, with virtual reality glasses, we can bring orchestras to us and we can sit down and we can feel the vibrations of those. We talk about smart cars, which we're saying, which can find their own ways around. But there's also a huge push for health. And I think that's very important for us to realize that, in fact, the protagonists for 5G say this is going to be an amazing step as far as our healthcare is concerned. And I'd like to be able to talk about that later. And we're also going to be talking about wearables and many connections, many ways that we can monitor our health, which in their words anyway, will be a great improvement. This is something I did research before this current crisis that we had. And it's very important from the start to say that I'm not one of those who say that this challenge that we have in this world is due to 5G. I firmly believe there's a virus. I know there's a virus as well. And it's very important for me to say that. And that's a sort of disclaimer because there's huge pressure, and certainly in the last week, from people who are saying this isn't the virus at all, it is 5G. I'm going to address this later on, but I'm also going to say that how there are basically philosophical things that we can talk about that actually link the two together, but not necessarily in a direct way. But it is interesting to see that Wuhan, where this current problem is supposed to have started with COVID-19, was pretty well the first city in the world to become a smart city, as we've just seen. And this is from China Daily 2012. The city is among the first batch of cities in China to pilot the Smart City program. It's also the first city in the world to open tender to global companies for intelligent city designs. I think we have to say also that part of these smart cities is a great concentration of people together as well. So it's an interesting link. But I'm saying as a disclaimer that this doesn't mean that I see that all our problems are due to 5G and not to COVID-19. Now, AI and 5G, they go together. As I say, the future of artificial intelligence, the growth of artificial intelligence, and it's already here. It allows us to, in Google, for us to find things very quickly because they seem to know where we're at. It's almost like the environment for artificial intelligence needs these higher frequencies of 5G and beyond. Remember, 5G is just the 5th generation of telecommunications. It doesn't mean gigahertz, it means just the 5th generation. And it is talking about higher frequencies and bandwidths that can take a lot more information. And so the two are codependent. as is the Internet of Things and the connectivity between the two. So there's a fusion of AI, 5G, and IoT, which is how they phrase Internet of Things, which is basically everything connected in your home and around you, so that there's through smart meters, and this is the future. And interesting enough, we are probably going to become one of those things as that connects us to all this as well. So this is the future, and it's so important, I think, for us to understand the hype and the excitement out there with many people about this being the future. And I'm also going to put over my point of view how that needs to be measured, I think, with an understanding of humanity and what our potential is. Here we go. And the media here anyway and around the world have been pretty cruel to those people who are concerned about the health effects of these higher frequency radio waves. And they have classed us, and this is just in our New Zealand Herald, as tinfoil hat wearing conspiracists. But it does show you that they're particularly worried about the counter argument or the discussion around this. And this is just in Auckland for those of us here, and I think it's the same probably in many places in Australia. That and this was just 2 or 3 months ago. Seems a long time ago now, doesn't it? When we were talking about this, and we've been overtaken by so many events in the last 3 weeks that's almost distracted us from us. But they were really saying they were already set up certain towers around Auckland. We can see them. I'm going to show you pictures of them soon. But these are going to be filled in, if you like, by many towers a few hundred meters apart on houses and lamp poles. And that's going to be happening here over the next 5 years. And I believe in most places around the world. And so it's going to be looking something like this. If you don't see the towers outside your house, they're going to be constructed on power poles and lampposts. And most of it, you will be seeing this, and certainly in Auckland, we're seeing this happening a lot, and interesting enough, quite a lot in the last 2 weeks where we've been in lockdown. It's been seen as an essential service to raise these. And around the world, they've been quite cunning, as you can see, the bottom right, I think probably somewhere in Arizona, they mimic cacti and as you can see, trees, not particularly well, I must say. And this is just a local example that's just about 2 kilometers from where I live. And another one on the other side of the road, just beside a medical center. And as you can see from this, there's been some concern about it in the local community. And somebody had put a sticker on that saying no to 5G. And here's one just up the road from me. Here's a local early childhood education center. And it's a bit vague, but you can see the tower in the background, which overlooks where the children play here. And I talked to the manager of this a couple of weeks ago, and she was sort of unaware. She really said, well, what on earth is that? And I discussed that with her, and she was concerned. And on these towers, you can see there's caution. There's a radio frequency exposure area, but it doesn't tell you how close or far you should be from them. Here you go, a little bit more clear in those areas. It says don't climb up, and I resisted the urge to climb up. As you can see, wouldn't be very easy. So that's what's on the ground. But as you probably know, there are plans and already underway to send many satellites, possibly 20,000, up above our world to interconnect with themselves, but also with these towers, changing the electrical field landscape of the whole world. As you know, we have our own electrical landscape called the human resonances, which have, as a result, mainly of the lightning strikes that occur in the equatorial rainforests, creating resonances, often in the hertz range, not in the megahertz or gigahertz range, but just in averaging at 7.5 hertz or so. And this is the sort of environment, the soup that we grow in, and nature and our bodies seem to be the most comfortable in. And interesting enough, it's where, when we in a relaxed state, in a meditative state, our brains entrain these frequencies. I do gather these frequencies have been rising recently. I'm not sure if that's due to what we're experiencing, these man-made frequencies, or not. But those are the frequencies that it would seem that our physiology prefers. What are we up against? Well, this was last year where the New York Times and Verizon formed a partnership so that they would create, the idea is through 5G and beyond, they create virtual reality through for news. And therefore the idea is that a virtual holographic reality is going to be produced for us, a narrative of what's going on in the world direct into our homes. One of the things about what's happening at the moment is that there's a certain conditioning for us to be at home and to be somewhat dependent on the media, if you like, giving us information. And so I'll leave it up to you to what you think about that. But it would seem to be that the narrative is going to be produced in real time, because there's not great lag time when it comes to 5G, and one of the proponents of 5G say it's wonderful because we'll be able to download movies in a matter of seconds, and there's therefore no lag between what is being recorded and what we're seeing. So therefore there'll be like an instant reality being projected onto us. And I think that may be something we can discuss later. So we see now that the media and what we call the big tech companies are in it together. And this to me explains why it's so difficult to get our message out through the mainstream media, because they see their future in this technology. And if they don't see that, they're going to lag behind. And therefore, this is important. As the same with our healthcare, it is seen that 5G and beyond, this is from Ericsson Wedshouse, is going to be terribly important for upgrading what we can do with health, not just with monitors, but with insurances, with tech companies, with apps that we can put on, monitoring apps. And from the Ericsson website, in healthcare, we predict 76 billion US dollars revenue opportunity in 2026 for operators, addressing healthcare transformation with 5G. For transformation to succeed, collaboration with different players is essential. So it's a massive investment opportunity. So we've got the proponents of 5G in the healthcare system and in the media. And as we see, this is a pie chart that actually says how we divide it up. In fact, the medical data here, although it's a small proportion here, doesn't use up that many bandwidths, but it actually, probably the biggest data grab they can get is going to get the medical data of everybody, well, certainly in the Western world anyway. And they're going to see that. So data management is very important. And also, so you've got the huge, I suppose, not only the investment companies, but big tech plus all the health management systems thinking this is going to be wonderful. And if that wasn't enough, we have the military industrial complex as well. As you can see, because of, and I'll talk about this a bit later, because these very rapidly, these narrow waves, in other words, the higher frequency, they can carry more data and more data instantly. So although it's not just weapons they're interested in, but actually early detection systems, and you can understand that's a good idea when you're detecting nuclear weapons. So this is just from last year, 5G implications on the battlefield. According to a recent report published by the US Defense Ministry Innovation Council, the true potential of 5G will be its impact on the war network of the future. This network will benefit thanks to a larger number of less expensive, more connected, and more resilient systems capable of operating in a rapidly evolving battle scenario. I hope you're getting the idea that how overwhelming this is, and that naysayers or people who are, let's say, pushing over a cautionary note, a cautionary angle to this, are struggling to get their words heard. The science of what we're talking about goes back probably over 50 years. When it comes to the armed forces, it goes right back through to the Cold War. And this is also a very interesting issue. This is a declassified document from 1977, but declassified in about 2012, I see. And this is a series of papers from what was then behind the Iron Curtain from Russia, explaining the science of these frequencies, explaining that they have an effect beyond just heating the body. And the actual, I've had a look at some of these papers, and although they're written over 40 years ago, to me, they're quality papers as well. And certainly they were taken into account and taken seriously by the CIA or the equivalent service of the day. And so huge amount of research into these millimeter waves and these higher frequencies has been done behind what was the Iron Curtain. And it still carries on in Russia and Ukraine and many other places. And we have to extend our database of knowledge looking at those papers. And again, from the same era, that this is somewhat chilling, because the Defense Intelligence Agency, which I believe was the CIA of the time, studied these papers. And I'll read this abstract because this is really important, I think. The abstract from this paper, which again has been declassified more recently. This study was undertaken to provide a review and evaluation of the current Eurasian communist country's state-of-the-art in the area of the effects of radio waves and microwaves. It generally covers the 1968 to 75 period. The major topics include discussions of the effects on humans and animals. The study provides information on the general trends of research with special attention to possible military application. And if you look at this a little bit more carefully, there are a couple of very telling sections there, and I am going to read these because I think, again, it puts everything into perspective. It puts into perspective the struggle that we're having as clinicians to sound warning, or to create warning signs, let's say, about this. If the more advanced nations of the West are strict in the enforcement of stringent exposure standards, there could be unfavorable effects on industrial output and military function. The Eurasian communist countries could, on the other hand, give lip service to strict standards, but allow their military to operate without restriction, therefore gain the advantage in electronic warfare techniques and the development of anti-personnel applications. And they go on later on in this summary from the intelligence agencies. Should subsequent research result in adoption of the Soviet standards by other countries, industries whose practice are based on less stringent safety regulations could be required to make costly modifications in order to protect workers. Recognition of this safety standard, and I'll talk about that later, could also limit the application of new technology by making the commercial exploitation of some products unattractive because of increased costs imposed for the need of additional safeguards. So what this tells me, that over 40 years ago, it was clear to these agencies and to the government that there was a danger involved in these. And they were talking about this openly in that time, or maybe in a more clandestine way than openly. So this contrasts, I think, with my own, and I believe everybody who's joining me in the seminar have a probably different philosophy, in that our lives are certainly dedicated to not doing too much harm. In fact, we want to do good. And the first thing we want to do is do no harm. So we're following what was claimed that Hippocrates said, although there's some debate about that. But certainly Hippocrates, this was his philosophy of prima non nocere, first do no harm. And again, Benjamin Franklin, who said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I suppose this is where I came in. When I saw all this stuff, I thought, well, this, how sure are we that this is safe? And this is surely the most important thing we can do. So there are two sides of the argument. Here's one person on the left-hand side, and this is really probably what's been pushed onto us and certain people like us who are sort of soft activists, I suppose, saying we're being told, well, prove it, it's not safe. And we're really saying, well, prove that it is safe. Ultimately, the onus should be necessarily on the technological industry to make sure that this is safe, and also on our politicians, we would have thought. And here we've got the famous frogs, boiling frogs. We'll get out when you prove we will be boiled alive. That's the burden of proof, but we're probably saying, well, we should probably get out until we till you can prove we won't be boiled alive. And the precautionary principle has been stated many times, and this is stated through UNESCO and at the World Commission of the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology. When human activities may lead to morally unacceptable harm that is scientifically plausible but uncertain, actions shall be taken to avoid or diminish that harm. And the interesting thing about this is that there's very little in science that's entirely proven, that we just have to have enough information to make us cautious. And I think I will probably go on to see that I believe that is what we indeed have. And it's interesting, and just to relate it to COVID at the moment, this is something I picked up a few days ago, cancer, COVID-19, and the precautionary principle, prioritizing treatment during a global pandemic. And these oncologists and epidemiologists said, based on the UNESCO working definition, which I've just said, that it should be something that sort of dominates how we manage ourselves at the moment, and exactly what's happened, particularly in New Zealand here, when we've got a level 4 shutdown, and we could say that's the precautionary principle in action. We don't know a lot about this virus, and we don't know a lot about its infectivity, but we're taking the best precautions possible. This principle should be applied to both our systems level approach to COVID-19 risks and to treatment recommendations for patients with cancer during the pandemic. And I believe we're just taking this principle and applying it to this other major issue. So here's the electromagnetic spectrum. Many of you will know this. And as we get, there's the, if you look at the left-hand side, we've got the longer waves resonating with larger objects, and as we get smaller and smaller, we approach the visible light in the middle, and then we get into the ionizing radiation, which resonates with atoms and subatomic particles, and are able to displace subatomic particles and therefore do the damage. And the narrative that's being pushed over, which I will totally dispute, is that the danger is all in the ionizing side, and that if you're in the frequencies below visible light, then there's no way that this causes damage. And that is a sort of an old chestnut that's being pushed out, and it's still being pushed out and being resurrected, even though it has no scientific basis at all. It's in fact a complete myth. And here's just, this has come from the Lancet from Australia's a wonderful Pri Bandara, who is a premium researcher in this, and this is from the Lancet, which, and without going into the details of this, this shows that the electrical smog, if you like, has increased, particularly around this 1 gigahertz. Giga means a billion hertz. A billion hertz, so the wavelengths get shorter and shorter, and there's a massive sort of spike around in the last 10 years, and that will be shifted. And it's also, we have to see that these wavelengths that, if I go back one part, we'll see that the 5G is in these higher wavelengths. So there are in the microwave there, so we're going from probably 1 gigahertz up to 300 gigahertz into the sub-terahertz range, which is a trillion, trillions rather than billions. So we're resonating with smaller and smaller objects, if you like. And so what we've got at the moment is that build up, but it's also on top of everything that we've had over many years. And this is basically a graph that shows what is there in our environment. And these lines above are the so-called safety levels. Those safety levels were basically created in the 90s, and on the understanding that the only damage that could occur from non-ionizing radiation was heat. And that again, the science of the last 20 years has all completely disproven. To such an extent that you've got a vast number of scientists and physicians around the world speaking out and very concerned. And they're speaking out from a scientific basis, from an independent scientific basis. And I'm sure people who are at this seminar already know these websites, but please go to those and sign up if you can, because they really stress the concerns that scientists have about the possible and future dangers of being clouded in this degree of non-ionizing radiation. And this is simply stated here: we, the undersigned scientists and doctors, recommend a moratorium on the rollout of the 5th generation 5G for telecommunication until potential hazards for human health and the environment have been fully investigated by scientists independent from the industry. 5G will substantially increase exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic fields on top of the 2nd generation, 3rd generation, 4G, Wi-Fi, etc. for telecommunications already in place. RF, this is radio frequency, electromagnetic frequency, has already been proven to be harmful for humans and the environment. One of the big studies recently is a $25 million US study by the National Toxicology Program, which showed statistically significant increase in the incidence of brain and heart cancer in animals exposed to EMF below the recommended levels. And this is the agency who decides what is safe and what isn't, and that is being challenged. The International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection Guidelines followed in most countries. I realize I'm talking pretty quickly, but there's a lot to get through, and I realize I'm half an hour through already, so I'm going to rush this a little bit. So this is this National Toxicology Program, which you probably know. This is the big study that showed that when male rats were exposed to the sort of frequency, just 900 millihertz of radio frequency radiation used by cell phones, there was clear evidence of tumors in the hearts of male rats, and the tumors were malignant schwannomas. We don't get schwannomas, although we did have a dog. Our own dear dog died of a heart tumor. which was a concern to us. But they are actually linked histologically to acoustic neuromas. And there was some evidence of tumors in the brains of male rats as well. And the tumors were malignant gliomas. But there was clear evidence, and this is very definite, of clear evidence. And I've been in some conflict with some researchers both here and in Australia, because this is what they published as a review article in New Zealand Medical Journal in August. And they interpreted this clear evidence as some possible cancer increases. And I thought the wording was wrong. And they actually showed you that they actually referred their readers to this website, which is the one I've just shown you, which say there's clear evidence. And then I noticed that there's a competing interests. And I'd have to say that I work at a university, and we are really dependent on the techno companies, not just because of how universities work, but the grants that the physicists will get as well, and as are the government. So you'd have to say there's competing interests all along, and here they talk about their competing interests. Anyway, I put pen to paper. This is what they'd referred us to, this clear evidence. And this is just an extract of my letter. It appears that Elwood and Wood have interpreted clear evidence of tumours as some possible cancer increases. There's no further explanation is given. The readers are left wondering whether this is a growth oversight, reflects a criticism, or even a conscious denial of the conclusions stated on the National Toxicology Programme website, to which they have been personally directed. I claim I have no vested interest apart from the wellness of my family and friends. Anyway, they replied to that, thanking me for my interest, and we agree that the animal studies are important. However, the interpretation is by no means simple. So obviously that means that I didn't understand. And interesting enough, their competing interests seem to disappear lower in the article. So what do we know about it? And you know, as a summation, I'm going to show you just in our limited time available, just some of the research that's been done, and certainly some meta-analyses that we have. But the bottom line really is that there's increased cancer risk, cellular stress, harmful free radicals, genetic damage, structural and functional changes in the reproductive system, learning and memory deficits, neurological disorders, and negative impacts on general well-being in humans and in plants as well. And because of that and also the study that I've just mentioned, the National Toxicology Programme, prior to this last couple of years, it's been classed as a possible carcinogenic group 2B. However, as a result of this recent study, they are going to be meeting, unfortunately, in 2 years. They were going to be meeting in 5 years' time, which seemed a bit strange, but in 2 years' time, and there's a chance that's going to be the level of the carcinogenic level is going to be raised from 2B to either 2A or even into the 1s. So there's sort of a race on at the moment, and that is going to have a major effect on I think the future of this technology. And also, of course, we talk about the broad spectrum of concern that we have. This is from an excellent series of seminars run in November of 2018 by a group called PHIRE, P-H-I-R-E, which are a group of concerned physicians and scientists in the UK. And this was Sarah Starkey, who is a PhD and I suppose a statistician with a deep understanding of health. And this shows that the in fact, what is being reported isn't quite true. So when it's properly researched, we see that there's been cherry picking. I see at the bottom, there's a bowl of cherries. That what is in fact the agencies, and AIMA is an agency in the UK, are saying has been cherry picking the studies. And what the studies are showing, that 79% of studies have demonstrated increased evidence of oxidative stress. And that this 78% have adverse effects on sperm, male reproductive organs, and altered testosterone concentrations. This, to me, although the focus has been on cancer, there's a huge issue as far as reproduction. And again, this is from FIRE, PHIRE. I can't recommend their work enough. You'll find it on YouTube, but also they're putting up a huge amount of information for the public. And this really stresses, again, from one of their handouts, the current safety limits used in the UK, based on these agencies from Europe, are set at 1 million times too high for biological protection. They were set in the 90s to protect only from thermal heating effects, and fail to protect from copiously documented non-thermal effects. Other countries have safety limits orders of magnitude below ours in the UK. Cities in the US, with Switzerland, Belgium, and Italy are slowing, halting, and are issuing resolutions to halt 5G and wireless tower near homes. It's a huge variation around the world. Our own science advisor here is a supporter of these old guidelines. She's a biochemist, and there is some concern as she's really promoting the fact that there is only heat effects from these. But when we look at her background, and I have nothing against her, I think she's an Oxford-trained scientist. I'm sure she's very good at what she's doing, but you can't ignore the conflicts of interest. She's involved in biotechnology. She's creating, let's say, enhanced skin for cosmetic reasons. And this is her, I suppose, her mission statement from her website. Rather than just understanding the structure that biology had given us, we wanted to change it and see what we could do with it. And she actually is the founder of a company that's called High Aspect, which specializes in developing protein-based materials for the skin. And she's partnership with major technological companies. And we'll actually have to find this within our university structure. There really are all combined. Basically, our academic departments are both dependent on working with technology. It wasn't long ago where we had universities and technical institutes. Well, we now know the two have combined, and technology has become incredibly sophisticated. So it's not surprising. It's not just for their funding that we see this happening. And again, we have huge pushes from government organizations who see the future in 5G and artificial intelligence. And this is one of them, Callahan Innovation. I'm rushing this on a little bit because I think that already, I think you've seen that there are great pressures to push this, much greater pressure than little old me and lots of other physicians can easy to counteract. And one of the doctors that is counteracting is you probably know Martin Paul, and his work, which is sort of backed by the majority now, is that electromagnetic frequencies affect calcium channels into cell. In fact, calcium blockers seem to be able to block this. What happens is a buildup of calcium within the cells, and you guys will know this far better than me, but this will lead to oxygen species and nitrates species being produced, free radical production, which is generally unhealthy to the cell. He's probably done the most work on the voltage gate calcium channel theory. and the build-up of these oxygen species to there. So we'll go on quickly onto the myths, that only ionizing radiation is harmful, non-ionizing radiation, radio frequency is safe. This is, I think, a myth, and yet is still pushed by our mainstream media. That the only harmful effect of non-ionizing radiation is heat. Again, even 20 years ago, that would have been seen to be wrong. This is interesting because they're actually using certain frequencies as non-ionizing radiotherapy. Here they're treating metastatic, advanced metastatic liver cancers using certain frequencies of non-ionizing radiation. So people can't have it both ways. That these frequencies and pulsations have been proven to safe. This is the biggest fib, I think, because there's been no studies done to prove that they've been safe. And so when they say there's no studies to show that it's unsafe, we're saying, well, there's nothing shown to be safe, and we can extrapolate that this is a struggle for us. That those of us who are anti-5G are simply anti-take Luddites. I dispute that by saying that if we wear a seatbelt, doesn't mean we're anti-car. Somebody used to play quite a lot of cricket. If I wear a helmet, doesn't mean I'm anti-cricket. 5G hasn't undergone any independent safety testing. And I'd have to stress that a lot of the stuff that I've said already is actually on what we've been exposed to already, which is accumulating in our environment. And because these waves don't, first of all, they don't carry particularly far, so that we have to have lots of antennae, but also they'll say, well, they don't penetrate the body in the same way. And that's to a certain extent true, but their understanding of the skin seems to be, let's say, not physiological. As you know, our skin has blood vessels. It also, we've discovered this organ called the interstitium of connective tissue, fluid-filled sacs of connective tissue. And we've also got microbiome. And also the skin and our mucous membranes are like as one. And so there is a concern about what this can do to our mucous membranes and our lungs. These frequencies also seem to resonate with our sweat glands. And this is one study that's been done in Israel, which shows that at 300 gigahertz and even below, they resonate with our sweat glands. They're, because of the size of the sweat glands. And these are studies done on students. If you can't do them on rats, you'll do them on students. They showed that experimentally, we showed the reflectance of the human skin and the sub-terahertz region depends on the intensity of perspiration. So not only they're resonating with the sweat glands, but also when the sweat glands produce sweat and water, it amplifies this, and you become an antenna for this, for these frequencies, both externally and internally. I work in student health, and this is a concern because of the level of anxiety that we have, and we say sympathetic overdrive that we see. And so that's a great concern to me, particularly as I've seen over the last 15 years. I've been a university doctor. I've seen this massive rise in anxiety. And in our university at the moment, we have many of these antennae going up. And this researcher, in particular, Paul Benichet, says this: the standards do not consider the skin rad effect when assessing possible health issues. And the myth number 7 is that anti-5G is a Russian plot. Well, we see why they talk about the Russians and the concern they have that they're setting the standards low for the population, but not for their military. This is your excellent I've only got a couple of minutes to go, I think, because I want to field some questions. This is your excellent Priyanka Pandara, who is at the forefront in the world of raising concerns about this. This is one of her excellent papers. 216 out of 242 studies that were investigated, endpoints relate to oxidative stress were found to have reported significant effects. And here's another one from a group in the Ukraine. Indicates that among 100 currently available peer-reviewed studies dealing with oxidative stress of low intensity radiofrequency radiation in general, and this is what we've exposed to already, 93 confirmed the oxidative stress in biological systems. And this is just an example of the database that he has there, showing papers of concern. And what we're seeing is that we're getting a very different story related to the public and to the press, where in fact the agencies are saying the evidence considered overall has not demonstrated any adverse health effects of exposure, but below internationally accepted guidelines. In fact, if you look at the data, 78% of studies show damage to male reproductive health, 97% to effects on proteins and cell membranes, 79% oxidative stress, 80% loss of cells in the brain, and 52% evidence of genetic damage and genotoxicity. So the independent observers are saying that conclusions from these agencies are based on false information, and that they go so far to say that evidence is covered up. I realize I'm running late here. This is just some indication of these different agencies, how they cross-fertilize, and they're not actually democratically elected. This is particularly in World Health and the rest. And they all feed into the same body. And I'd have to say that one of the biggest concerns, and it's not yet, I suppose, proven, but there's a number of studies that are pointing that way, is showing that it would seem to be that the follicles in unborn children, female children in the fetus are affected and possibly destroyed. So that we're finding if the chance, the possibility if a pregnant woman goes into this environment and she's pregnant with a female fetus, that female fetus may eventually be infertile. And a number of studies there. And although that's not proven, it's a great concern to me. And these are just what's being pushed out by our government, which appears to be propaganda for the industry. I rushed through this. And just before we go, there isn't a lot in the literature about electrohypersensitivity, but however, in my practice, I see this and I certainly believe it. I would see that electrohypersensitivity is often complex. It runs in people who have experienced complex post-traumatic stress, including head injuries. And this is a paper that actually ties the two together to say that, and it may well be that the delay that we're seeing, and I certainly am, in patients recovering from what seem to be mild head injuries may be influenced by the electrosmog that they're involved in. And again, I would like to, I'll share, you can have these and study these at your leisure, how complex post-traumatic stress disorder can, people who are suffering from this, and the huge numbers the population are, may be more affected by electrohypersensitivity. And this is just the Federal Communication Commission in America, who is sort of making a disclaimer by saying that we don't really believe it's causing any problems, but because there's a concern there, we're going to address it. And again, this is something you can see in your own time. I'd love you to, and this is why all the devices have warning signs on them. I'd have to say it was for our sake, but it may well be disclaimers. So the saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge farther than society gathers wisdom. Isaac Asimov. It would be lovely if we can get the message out and the people will decide that we may be really concerned about future generations being exposed to this without our warning signs. And the solutions, there is a paper that I'll put in here that if there's some questions now, I'll probably refer to this. This is how possibly antioxidants can help. There's not a lot of that, and I will go through that in a minute because I want to spend the last few minutes that we have for questions. This is just to say in Cyprus, there's a campaign with the government and the local hospital. They've all got together and they have a campaign of taking their Wi-Fi out of the hospital, children's hospital, and are taking out of the primary schools. And there's a collaborative effort there. And this is, I hope I will pass this on to you. This is a wonderful resource which runs very short courses you can do in 20 minutes for your home and for your business, and gives all the data in an amazingly, I suppose, easily followed way. We've been there before. There's been times where we've been sort of, let's say, pressured by industry. And you can see from this didn't turn out well. And also we're using the precautionary principle, as I've said now, very rightly so with COVID-19. All I'm asking is that we should use the same precautionary principle for the rolling out of 5G, which is we're all going to be surrounded with. So thank you very much. Questions? I've only left you a few minutes, I'm afraid, and I've been a motor mouth. So back to you guys.
Okay, thanks very much. This is Sandeep Gupta here. So really, really informative talk. Thanks very much, Robin, on the scientific and political sides of 5G. So we've got one question up to start with, and if anyone else has any more questions, they can post that in the question and answer bar down the bottom of the Zoom menu. So the only question to date, Robin, is if we assume 5G is going to be installed throughout the world, what measures can we take to prevent ourselves? It's a million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, I think prevention is better than cure, and that's why I think it's important for us in the know to be voices, to try and, because we're not against, I think I'm certainly not against the advancements of technology in science, but we're talking about safe. We want this to be proven to be safe. And the evidence is if it's not going to be safe, it's going to be most damaging to children, to unborn children and future generations. So once it's here, we have got a problem. And there are certain devices being sold and advertised. I find, and I'm not convinced by them yet, because I think it's going to be all around us. It's going to be something that we need to address in the preventative way. Having said that, the paper that I've just glossed over here really tries to address whether antioxidant defense is going to be helpful. And they've got an interesting, here's a picture of how basically brain cells are affected by this, and there's a similar cycle as I showed before with Martin Paul. And here actually a slide showing that folic acid can have an effect on the so-called destruction of Purkinje cells, which I think are in the cerebellar tissue. There's scanty evidence for this, and they talk about, I think, vitamin E, melatonin, folic acid being helpful. I just think it's that the horse has bolted somewhat when we're doing that. And I think that the push needs to be for proper independent studies to be done. I mean, it would be lovely if they come up with some advances that are going to be safe. But unfortunately, what now we're fronted with is propaganda and a certain amount of gaslighting, as I say, of people, of good researchers who are concerned, and they should be concerned. I believe we have more than enough science to be really cautious, even if we had a tenth of the science that we have, we could enact the precautionary principle. But as I've tried to push out, I have to say what we're up against, all sides, and the media, and a big push from the health industry as well, saying this is going to be a great advance. I think when the COVID crisis is over, it'll be reignited. It's been somehow put to the side. And those who are saying, and I'll say before, that this is all due to 5G and not COVID-19 upsets me, because it actually doesn't help our argument, because unless that research is done properly. Does it affect our immune systems? Yes, but so does a lot of things. Could it be a cofactor? Possibly, but we haven't got that information, and we're very wrong to push this at the moment. But I think it's going to be seen, unfortunately, as the solution to our current problem. It's going to be because there's going to be promoted that telemedicine, which I'm doing at the moment, is going to become more prominent. It's going to be that we are going to be possibly healthier if we're more isolated, but there again connected through this technology, through virtual reality and virtual reality headsets. There'll be a huge push to see that 5G and above, and artificial intelligence is the solution to these pandemics. And that's going to be very interesting, and that's when the debate's going to be raised to another level, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Robin, so one of the questions from Ray Norona is, if we wanted to advance the scientific proof on 5G, how would you see us designing a clinical trial which would really, definitively answer the question on the health effects of 5G in humans?
It's very difficult, because we're pretty well all exposed to it. To get a good control group of humans becomes pretty well impossible. And so therefore the animal studies, that NTP study, I think is very relevant, because it's just a very good study. It's going to, I think we've got enough science to be cautious. And then we have to have the intent for independence, and basically the big tech, if you like, have to fund this. If there's going to be investment of those multi-billions, and I think it'll be trillions into this, we'd have to start insisting that a proportion of that goes into proving that it's safe before they start. If we had 10 billion, if we had all that, we've got to start. But it's going to be very difficult. And I think the word of mouth is our main activity. I think kindergarten teachers educating mothers about this, parents, it's sort of got to come from the grassroots, those people who are concerned that their children are being exposed to this and their grandchildren are exposed to it. So I think it has to come from a public move. It has, and that's what I'm interested in, is educating the public, so that they're the ones, I think, that's got to take it further. Yeah. Absolutely.
And are you finding any particular areas or any particular groups of patients in which you have to particularly be aware of the health effects of EMF and 5G in particular?
Yeah, I think people have access to that paper on head injuries. I'm seeing it as an added issue, and I think our job is seeing so many cofactors contributing to ill health. Even when you have a viral condition, it's like COVID, whether a person is a smoker, whether they've been exposed to industrial toxins, to pollution, to glyphosate, you can say all this adds up, if you like. And I see that the people who are actually having symptoms of electro hypersensitivity, which isn't sort of recognized out there, apart from places apart from Scandinavia. Many of them also have a lot of other trauma. And that in no way lessens their problem. It could be easily said, well, they've got all these other problems as well. So I see that the people who are most affected are already those who are unwell. Those who are incredibly sensitive as well. We have one of the things acupuncture taught me is there's this huge range of sensitivity out there, and the sensitive ones and the artistic people will notice this because they are sensitive. And sensitivity, I say, is not a weakness, it's a strength. Our children are incredibly sensitive. And so our children, our babies, and it's not just those who show symptoms. In some ways, they have an early warning system if they have symptoms. And so I believe that it's very widespread. I certainly switch my Wi-Fi off at night. And it worries me that people have Wi-Fi on at night. There's enough evidence to show that you should be switching your Wi-Fi off at night. You'll sleep better. Yeah.
Okay, great. And just really, I guess we're starting to see these patients more and more, as you say, who are the canaries in the coal mine, and they're reacting to all kinds of different things. Sometimes it's chemicals, sometimes it's mold, and in many cases it's EMF. And so when we start to look at solutions, we have a couple of questions on antioxidants here. When we might be utilizing antioxidants to help sensitive patients to deal with the effects of EMF or whatever it might be. Are you finding any particular ones, let's say melatonin in particular, are you finding that to be particularly helpful to?
I think it is. It's terribly difficult. They're very difficult to treat because really they have to escape this electrosmog. That's getting more and more difficult. So yes, to a certain extent, but I don't think we've got the answer with that yet. I think it's worth doing, and I certainly do encourage that as well.
Right, but you're saying if you don't get away from the EMF, then it's not necessarily.
This is the big problem. And with the satellites going up, they're planning to actually irradiate the whole world. So even if you go up to Northern Territory or somewhere, it will still happen. So avoidance is the best, but it's going to become more and more difficult to do that.
Right, and then we had a question then tying in melatonin to COVID-19. So there's some evidence now suggesting that melatonin may be a really important weapon in treatment and perhaps even prevention of COVID-19. Do you have any thoughts around that and other nutrients?
Only what I saw Tim's work on this and some other that have been talking about this as well. And they've also said COVID-19 can affect that calcium channel, and that's a lot of debate about that as well. And I don't think we can draw a lot of conclusions from that and linking that into 5G, but it's possible, of course, that COVID-19 has happened because we have so many toxic attacks on our cells already. And it's just one more, and that's what we're seeing. I think we can say that. I think we've got to be more holistic about it and see. But this is a soup, if you like, we're all going to be exposed to. This is the big problem, and I think this is my push is thinking about it, is that the push needs to come from the people. We need to educate the people, and particularly the mothers and the kindy teachers. I think they have the power with our support. It's got to come from that using antioxidants, I think, is important, but it's not really getting right to the problem of exposure.
It's mitigation, isn't it, to a certain degree? And I guess on the topic of mitigation, as we're winding up, there's a couple of questions about, sort of more physical protection from EMF. And do you have any thoughts on how helpful wireless protectors such as the Blue Shield devices might be? And also, it's a two-pronged question here. And also, do you find that forests and trees may somewhat shield 5G?
Well, the answer is yes. I love the forest, and I think that's great. But if you can get into a forest and somehow the radiation isn't coming in from Elon Musk's satellites, you're okay. And the trees are trees and they're not towers. They've got to make sure that that's the case. So absolutely. I mean, I think you put yourself in a Faraday cage. The problem is that shields all the good stuff as well. We are actually dependent on these human resonances as well. So as much of nature, can we go within? Can we meditate? Absolutely. And I think there are ways, there are certain people that are producing certain gizmos that may be effective, but there's also a lot of opportunism out there, and that doesn't convince me. I just think that it's all right us going within and meditating, and that may protect us to a certain extent, but it's not going to help the children or the pets. I haven't talked about the pets and the animals and the insects as well. So I've got so much concern about this that I believe we have to be preventative, and that everything else is secondary to that. We have to be activists. I'm really encouraging anybody who's watching this to do their own research. Please only use my information to further your own research. That's the way we're going to get through this. And I'm very happy for anybody to sort of contact me and question me. I'm very enthusiastic about this, but I'm only one of many with my angle on it.
Great. Well, look, there's a few more questions on mitigation and so on. Would you suggest that people just contact you if they have more questions?
Well, I can answer them now, but if there's time, but otherwise.
Okay. Well, maybe if we take another 3 or 4 minutes, and that'll take us to a quarter to, that should be fine. So someone asking about EMF protective paint, and also the fabric used in the Block-It Pocket for mobile phones. Not sure if you've heard of that device.
I've heard of these. I don't know a lot about them. I do know people who have sort of tended to be cautious about these things, that you can get things trapped under your clothes. I can't. I certainly don't endorse them, and I'm not enthusiastic necessarily about what's been produced. It doesn't mean something isn't going to be produced that's going to be wonderful. I just don't think so at the moment. But that's my own thought. There may be other people with more knowledge of these protective devices. But I certainly, with what I know, aren't using anything. I haven't worked out anything that I think is going to be worthwhile. Yeah. There's some interesting things from some scientists from Eastern Europe who have created a certain device which the nature of which they're keeping quiet, but they're basing it on quantum science. They seem convincing on some levels, but they're still not telling us for copyright reasons what they're doing. So I'm cautious about that as well. I'd love them to be right. I'd love these people to be right. My nature is to say that I'm somewhat cautious. I just from the overwhelming environment that we're going to be put in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know how much 5G is going to, be able to be protected from in any way, until it really rolls out, isn't it?
And I think so. And if what I've pushed over is it's what we've exposed. All the science that I pushed today is what we're exposed to already. What happens when we add these other frequencies on top? Admittedly, they don't travel so far, but they're on top of what we've got already. So they're not just the higher frequencies. They actually have a whole, there's a soup and a collection of frequencies, all of which already are a concern. And we're going into the unknown. Our point is, the narrative is that there's nothing to prove that they're not safe. But we're saying there's nothing to prove that they're safe, and the evidence that we have already shows that we need to be cautious, because we're reaching a limit, and it's a real battle. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably on that note, one of my last questions is a philosophical one, and that is it too late? How much time do you think we have to make changes, or has our rollout of technology gone too far to be reversible?
I'd like to think, though, that we have a voice still. The push really is for a huge, overwhelming role of artificial intelligence. And I don't think we can stop that. And we're already using it. And we're all taking advantage of it when we did book holidays, for instance. It's a lot quicker, and there is this intuitive connection we have to computers. So we're already pretty close to it, and most of us are grateful for that. But there comes a time where the artificial intelligence overpowers us, because artificial intelligence, to be philosophical, doesn't have a heart. It doesn't have a compassion. That has to be dialed in. And I'm not convinced that that is being taken into account. And I think we're already seeing this by them not being cautious about the safety. It worries me that those people who are the protagonists are overlooking this, and it doesn't bode well for the future if they're stumbling at that hurdle. So I think it's a big point of the public becoming aware and pressuring the politicians and the people in power. And that's been a struggle, because the politicians are dependent on this as well. So it's got to come from people. It's got to come from the hearts of people who care, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I'm very thankful for the presentation today, Robin. I think you've really covered this topic in a lot of depth. And as you say, you know, if we all as integrative medicine practitioners do our own research on 5G and EMF in general and investigate it with regard to our patients, maybe we can find, you know, different solutions that some of our patients can utilize to help their health. And then there's the lobbying side, as you say, there's the educational side, just to get the info out there about what EMF is doing. And on an individual level, it's just, you know, finding the best way that we can find health and peace on all levels. Valley Moore says she uses a shungite pyramid while working in the city. And notices a definite difference in her level of concentration. So there's all sorts of tools.
You know, I'm not knocking that at all, and I think that's good. Obviously, we need that. And I have to say that you know, there's the pushes. There's adverts here that show that you can do remote surgery on animals, for instance. So it's a very cute advert of a dog being added. And I'm saying, yeah, you can. Maybe we're going to need these higher frequencies and these the shorter lag times and all the data that can be carried for good. But it means, like, you can switch it on and switch it off, which is what you do with ionizing radiation. You switch it on and switch it off. So right. there's a level. So we can use the best of this for that sort of work. But the rest seems to be entertainment, and which pushes them. That's where all the money is in virtual reality entertainment. And that is not as important to me. Those are the clip-ons to life, aren't they? They're not the love of life. and so I think that's where our push should come. But it's got to come from us doing the research. It's got to come from a lot of common sense and from being compassionate about our children and the future. I think that's where our strength lies.
Absolutely. So thank you once again for this presentation, Robin, and I'll hand over to Cressida.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
You there, Cressida?
Yeah, I just had to unmute myself. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you for Joe for being online as well. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And remember that next week we have Patria King talking. It'll be wonderful. It's going to be half an hour earlier. So looking forward to seeing you all then. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Enjoy.
Thank you.